Hey, friends. I want to, if you haven't met my friend, Dr. David Klonsky, I want to introduce you to him. Dr. David Klonsky is a professor of psychology at the University of British Columbia. He is also a martial artist. He's a black belt in karate, has an amateur MMA fight. He's a fellow fight nerd who happens to be a psych professor. We've been threatening to write a book together. We've been working on it. I'm kind of glad that it's taken a while because we've learned more about what this book is going to be about just by stretching out the time. But the book, the working title is 100% mental, 90% mental. So we get together and we chat about things with this idea of sometime in the future writing a book. And so, David, it's good to see you, man.
Good to be back. Yeah, always fun.
So we got together last night and we talked about a few things. While David's in town, we're going to do we're going to chat now and maybe another one in a day or two. Last night we got together and the first thing we started talking about, among other things, was McGregor and Alvarez, right? And the observation that I keep making, and of course, David Mullins, I do a podcast on combat sports psychology with him, is that people deny that it's going to be weird in there with Conor, that psychologically something will be different. Most of the time people just dismiss that and then find themselves in there, and then all hell breaks loose psychologically. Did you pick that up in this one?
So they know it's going to be a different mental battle leading up to it because he's all in your face, or he's different psychologically, but they don't take him seriously, if I hear you right.
Yeah.
That he's also a different level fighter, and then that surprises them in the first minute.
And I think you feel it somehow. And when we go and we watch, especially if you have a negative bias, or even if you have a positive bias towards McGregor, there's a weird physicality, there's a weird intensity, and you could dismiss that. And Eddie, who, it's well documented, is one of my favorite fighters ever. So I look at it from his point of view too. He was like, well, Santa Claus isn't real. This is just nonsense. And suddenly you're in there and it's not nonsense.
Right. Or maybe he's real, but I'm real too.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, You certainly saw Eddie come out. He looked confident. He looked like he had his whatever plan he wanted to implement. And then he got hit early. And I think, you were describing how an urgency takes over. Yeah. And that urgency is not mapped on your game plan. Right. That urgency is mapped onto what just happened in front of you. And this Conor guy might be better than I thought because no one's hit me that accurately, that fast, that hard.
Well, so this is a concept I've been playing around with. A lot of things now, I go back and look at some of Bruce's philosophies that I ignored for 10 years, was very interested in, ignored for 10 years. You circle back and it's like, oh my God, it just keeps getting proven to be so. But this roots from there, but it's something I've been playing around with, is the idea between importance and urgent. So it's important that I establish my, threat of the takedown. It's important that I get my right hand going. It's important that I am moving to my left. But when important is when it's important versus urgent will always win. And urgent is, there's a tornado and we've got to get the hatches done. And suddenly Conor makes you deal with the urgent. And you're so busy dealing with the urgent that if you don't deal with the urgent now, the urgent will kill you now. The problem is, if you don't deal with the important will kill you later, right? And so you push it off, but then you've done none of the work you needed to do, and you're dealing with all this urgency, and you're in trouble.
Yeah, that makes me think of some of my favorite, game planning performances. Because I always thought of them as that's just a really amazing skill, not just to have a smart game plan, but to stick with it. I mean, a recent one is Holly Holm over Rousey. Clearly, she had a particular game plan. She'd been preparing, for months or years. But the distinction you're bringing up also makes me realize you could see the urgency in it. Like Holly Holm knew, if I deviate from this game plan, if Rousey grabs me for a moment, that could be it. And so she implemented that plan with urgency. And you're right, we don't often see that with people's game plans. It's important, but then it changes, it revolves, or they get caught up in, trading punches, and it can hurt them.
Well, the urgency is, this guy's hitting me with his left hand. Holy shit, he's coming at me. Holy shit, I don't know what to do about the distance. All that becomes urgent, which overrides the important. But if we treat the game plan, like you're suggesting, as it is urgent, it must be addressed now. We have to deal with this, because if it's simply important, it'll kill you later if you don't deal with it. If it's urgent, we accept that it must happen now. So it's sort of the framing of urgent versus important.
Yeah, and and maybe another way to look at that is that conflict, urgent versus important, only comes up if the game plan is not well matched to the reality. If the game plan's well matched to the reality, and Conor's hitting Alvarez in a way he doesn't want, but Alvarez's game plan is specifically to counter that, then the game plan becomes more urgent.
Right.
But if he went in there with a game plan that suddenly wasn't well matched, and Conor's strengths is Conor's getting to impose his strengths, now Alvarez's urgency is not in tune with what he's been practicing for his 6 to 8 week camp.
Right.
And that is a problem.
Yeah, this new urgency overrides it, and this new urgency is in reaction to what he's doing instead of in trying to implement what you desperately want to do. It's a really interesting thing. So you bring up well matched to the reality.
Well, Condit Diaz was an example. I know we've talked about. I talked about that a lot because it's such a nice example of a game plan that someone's sticking to. But it's because when you stand in front of Nick Diaz too long, your face gets lit up, lighted up, and so then you have an urgent desire to get out of there. But that was also Condit's game plan, was to constantly come in and out, control that distance, strike, move out, and so the urgency to escape face punching was the same as the urgency to stick with the game plan.
Right.
And Alvarez apparently didn't have that benefit.
Yeah, and I think this is something that we notice with whether you're a fan or you are another fighter or you're the opponent, is when something like McGregor comes along that really is new or different, and it's easy to argue, well, it's not new, people have done this type of manipulation of range, and they've done this type of rhythm, and they've developed one really powerful weapon that you fear. It's true, but the way that he's using it in conjunction with sort of the mental approach to the game, it's new to the fighters. And people deny it. And your desire to say that's not really something special doesn't allow you to accept the reality and prepare properly for it. So if you keep saying this is bullshit, what if it turns out it's not bullshit? And that's what's happened to everyone but Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz accepted, like, yo, man, this guy hits really hard, and he, like, whatever he said publicly, the Diaz mentality is treat this with absolute seriousness, accept that it's badass, and go kill it. You know, and so he was able to push it into a thing where he found the weakness and exploited it because he was there the whole time. But literally everybody else, you've seen something change in them the moment that they get in there with him. And Mullins, who has been watching his career in person in Ireland, said that's happened at every level. When he was in, Cage Rage or any of these other ones, it happened. And he's getting better and better at it. And you have to accept that it's real.
That's interesting, because I remember Nate Diaz explicitly saying, for the first fight, I knew going in I was going to get hit. It was going to take me a while, and I was going to get hit, which is very different from going in and, I'm different, or I have the solution. He's not, McGregor's not going to get me. And Nate Diaz is like, no, he's going to get me, but I'm going to still stand there and then keep coming forward. Yeah. He made McGregor feel urgency in both their fights.
100%.
And that's the contrast between the two is a nice way of showing how you can have an urgent response that's not part of the game plan versus with part of the game plan, because the first time he made Conor a wrestler.
That's right.
You're a wrestler now. And that was Conor's response to, feeling this urgency that I'm fatigued, he's withstanding my punches. And the same situation, I think it was towards the end of the second round again, came up, but Conor had prepared, and his urgent response was the game plan, which is, I have to stall, but I cannot try to take him down. I cannot try to wrestle with him. And so I'm just going to be tired, and I'm going to protect myself as much as I can until my energy comes back. And so he sort of had opportunity to train what his urgent response would be when the same situation happens.
That's exactly right. It's interesting how this all connects together, and Aldo wants a rematch with McGregor. Now, what Aldo, and that may never happen, and that's a whole other conversation. We had it last night about how whether it's Aldo himself or a fan or Aldo's friend or anyone, this idea that when you complain, you feel like you're taking some action. You know what I mean? It's like, this is unfair. I can't believe this guy gets the title shot. But as a society, we have learned, we have developed this idea that through complaining, we are taking some action. But actually, while focusing on complaining, we are it is committing us to inaction. We're doing nothing. People don't see that. Like, I'm shocked always by it as just a human being, that the amount of complaining that people do must be rooted in the idea that somehow they feel like that's actually an action when they're being tricked into inactivity by complaining. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it feels like you're taking a stand, you're fighting for yourself,
Yeah.
but you're actually accomplishing nothing.
Literally nothing. But you're spending the time, you're allowing yourself to get emotionally dragged into it. Ramdeen and I talked about this, about TJ Dillashaw, and he found out that Garbrandt was going to get the fight with Dominic Cruz that he wants and deserves.
Right.
Now, TJ Dillashaw, unlike many other people, he did complain. He suddenly said, this is unfair, this is an abomination of the sport, all those things. But that lasted like 2 days, because then he went with an almost stoic philosophy response of changing his perspective. It's like, okay, this is a real thing, but I can do something about it. Then number 2 was take action. Complaining itself, this is unfair, I'm going to quit, I'll retire if they don't. No action. But actually saying, I don't like to have to do this, but I'll go and knock out the next guy. And if they don't give it to me then, I'll knock out the next guy. That's action that he took because probably good leadership with Dwayne, and together they said, we are going to do what we need to do. We'll accept the unfair reality of what's going on, and we'll go and take action. And that is, we'll knock out, who has he got next? Lineker. We'll go knock out Lineker. And then they'll have to give it to us. And if they don't, we'll knock out the next guy. That's an example of how to live your life instead of standing around complaining, which is inactivity and inaction. Go and take action. You know?
It makes sense. I mean, choose a productive path. Use the situation and your time wisely. And at the same time, there's this environment now where if you talk well enough, you get what you want.
Right.
So I understand why some fighters are confused.
Right.
What am I supposed to do? Talking apparently can get you what you want, but you have to be good at it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just whining. But if you're good at it, like Chael or McGregor, you get what you. So it's a little confusing.
So, but that idea, so that is a skill, the ability to speak or capture an audience in such a way that it is powerful enough that it takes an action. But that's a full skill. And if you are training with a fighter and you're a mentor and a friend as a psychologist, you're going to quickly look and go, this is a skill that will require so much energy for you, Steve, who is not naturally good at it, that maybe we'd be better spent putting the energy on making you a better fighter.
And that's a great point. If you're not naturally good at it, it will take so much work and practice to get good at it that it's probably, you're right, it's not worth it. I don't know how many people saw and I'm sure you saw that television interview with Chael and Tito Ortiz.
Yeah.
Oh, that was so hard to watch because you had a master of talking against someone who wanted to be just as good in that moment and just didn't have it. Oof.
As a rule of thumb, if you're going to say something that you've heard many others say in the past, don't bother saying it. And we see that all the time. I mean, it's like, his mouth is writing checks, his fist can't catch. Like, if you are going to draw on things, like, we're so much more comfortable with imitation than we are with innovation. Like, if it's been said before, we're comfortable doing it. It's also how people choose to fight or act or whatever. But on that idea, if we go and we have everybody trying to talk and manipulate through words, we're probably better off, due to the scarcity principle, to go concentrate on fighting. Well, they're spending all their energy on that, and some of them will be good at it, but there's not room for, if all 400 get good at it, it will cancel itself out. So let's just go work on choking people out.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So you said something earlier that's I find confusing, and I can't figure out what the difference is. So you said that with Conor McGregor, people who are fighting him are somehow not trusting that he's as good as he says he is or he looks. But when you think about another dominant fighter, Ronda Rousey, dominant except for her one loss, no one didn't take her judo or grappling seriously. They all saw she is elite in that, and to beat her, we have to get around that. So what's the difference? I mean,
denial for whatever reason,
but
probably
why?
due to his personality. You don't want this, and I find it enjoyable. Actually, I have almost no opinion on his personality because I'm so enamored with the skill. As somebody who studies fighting, how he manipulates a company into paying him more money, or how he uses the media to buy himself more cars. I don't care. It has no bearing on me. So I don't have a bias, good or bad, due to the way he acts. But fighters are like, I fucking hate this guy. So if you hate somebody, you want to... If you can look at it and go, I hate the way this guy speaks, I hate the way that things seem unfair around him, I hate the fact that he's an obnoxious whatever, but damn, is he a good fighter. If I'm going to beat him, that's the part I have to focus on. But I think it's all this other stuff. And, you know, and what people say, there are millions of reasons that they'll say it. But he said, you know, when they said, what did you see from Eddie? And he's like, I think he thinks this is a game. I think he thinks, you know, that this is just a game. And when he gets in there with me, he'll find out it's not. And that's more or less what happens each one of these times. They think the fact that he also has this mouth and also has this kind of manipulative star power and also has the ability to influence, somehow they think that's all it is, when in fact he's also a special martial artist. So for whatever reason, that's been going on in the audience, but it's been going on in the fighters too. Like Eddie, to keep saying, "Oh, it's nothing special," that you're not preparing yourself to deal with the thing when it turns out it is special.
I can understand the argument that, you know, the UFC. I mean, I don't necessarily agree, but you know, the UFC is giving him opponents that are the right kind of opponents for him. You know, they're protecting him from Khabib.
Yeah.
I can understand those points more, but for people who more or less make their living striking, you know, like Aldo and to some extent Alvarez, I'm confused that they would not see the reality. And I'm wondering, is there something about striking that's somehow less definitive than takedowns and submissions? Like, it's harder to deny. It's easier to imagine that someone can get lucky punches than lucky takedowns and submissions. So with Rousey, love her or hate her, you can't deny she's good at what she's good at. But with McGregor, well, yeah, he's above average, but some of those were just, you know, people being psyched out, and then he happens to land. Like, because it's confusing to me that he's clearly so elite. I mean, even that finishing flurry against Alvarez, where Alvarez was rocked and kind of stumbling back. Alvarez didn't know where his chin was going to be. Yeah. McGregor like throws these 4 follow-up punches that each hit the mark perfectly. That was inhuman.
Yeah, and yet I would have to assume that future opponents will not deny it, and that whoever is somewhere in line, Tony Ferguson, who may be in that path somewhere, is right now going, this guy's a crazy martial artist, and that's the test that I want, and that's the challenge that I want, and I'll raise my game to it, which will give you a better chance of dealing with the reality when you face it. But my analysis of McGregor is about his tools and his weapons and the philosophy and stuff, but it's also of the path. And he seems to, all the evidence says that the reason you get this good is you see the obstacle as the way, right? So you're not flexible. So you should take yoga. We were discussing that last night.
Yes, we were.
Instead, people will be like, I'm not super flexible, so I'll find some way around that. You're not super flexible, so the answer is to become flexible. McGregor has shown that repeatedly. And we'll have this narrative over and over, whether he wins his next one or he loses his next one. At some point, he will fight Khabib. Until that point, people will say, oh, he's avoiding, oh, they're protecting him. The UFC could give 2 fucks about protecting. And people, again, don't necessarily want to acknowledge that. But losing to Nate Diaz was the biggest thing for the UFC ever. So this idea that you want to protect this guy is not in line with the facts. What they want to do is make a lot of money from people paying to watch fights. People will pay to watch Khabib McGregor 2 if Khabib destroys him. So there is no idea of protecting this. It doesn't make sense. It's not in line with their goals. Their goals are to sell pay-per-views. Also, McGregor's, the obstacle is the way. To get better, I have to prepare to fight guys like this. And he's shown that evidence over and over and over again. So this fight will happen at some point. Khabib is kind of Ronda Rousey. Once he gets it to the ground, that's the end of it. How he does that is different than how she does it, but the build-up, the structure of the fight is exactly the same. He needs to put you on your back. Conor McGregor says, you can't touch me and I can hit you. Put those 2 things together and there'll be an incredible technical battle, but there'll be an incredible psychological urgency to each of them having to do what they have to do.
I can't claim to have watched enough of Khabib as I should have. What's he... what's he like closing the distance? Because we knew with Rousey that would always be a problem against not just a striker, but a striker who has good distance control like Holly Holm. Because Rousey closes the distance by coming forward.
Yeah. And she always did, and she just did it ravenously.
And that kind of strategy against McGregor, I mean, McGregor will light the guy up.
Yeah.
Because he can maintain the distance, and then he can hit you precisely. So I would imagine it takes some amount of either just willingness to be hit and not go down, or some sort of creativity, some sort of timing, and how does Khabib's game fit there?
Well, combat sambo, the reason that route, when you evolve a fighter from that route, because people, he's a karate guy, he's a sambo guy. They all start somewhere, and then but the route where they start shapes how the tree grows.
Definitely. And
the closing of distance using strikes in the world of combat sambo is very different than every other fighter you face. So that's the different rhythm and the different timing, using aggression and pulling back, filling the space with weapons as you go in. It's ultra tenacity, urgency. So, Eddie got in on McGregor, and then McGregor's ability to stop that had improved dramatically, and you have to have the urgency. There's another fight is coming up. There was something else. With Woodley. It's like, if the first effort doesn't work on Thompson, then you go to the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the seventh, the ninth, whatever is required. You have to have that urgency, and Khabib has that too. So there's an urgency mindset element to how he gets it down, but there's also a difference in rhythm and timing and deceptive closing of space. So all of that you'd have to prepare for if you're McGregor. Right. But McGregor, unlike the people who fight him and Kavanaugh, they might publicly say, oh, he's uninvolved, whatever, but privately they look and go, this is a very real threat. We have to acknowledge it, study it, and beat it soundly, Yeah,
I mean, McGregor's clearly a realist. I mean, as much as people want to say he creates into fantasy worlds and lives in them, I forget who it was who said this recently. Frankly, it could have been you, it could have been a Jack Slack article, but someone said that McGregor's shock value, mental, behavior masks his real mental genius, which is being honest about his own, abilities and how to improve them, honest about how he matches up with others.
Exactly.
And willing to face that. He doesn't need to be coddled. We talked about how when he went to, train with Eddie Bravo, he wanted to roll with the best guys. He wasn't afraid of being embarrassed. He didn't want to be coddled. He just wanted to go with the best guys because he knew that would be the best learning.
The obstacle's the way.
Yeah, and this is the part of Conor which is at least as important as the psyching other people out piece.
Yeah, it's true. This has been really fun. So after we do some things and stuff over the next day or so, let's do another one. We'll talk about Ronda. After you watch this one, we'll have that one up shortly. But follow Dr. David Klonsky on Twitter. What are you on Twitter?
Klonsky MMA.
Klonsky MMA on Twitter. And Dave writes some psychological pieces sometimes for MMA Latest and some other places as well. So we'll get together and talk about Ronda soon. Thanks for joining us. And one day, a year, 2 years in the future, buy our book, 90% Mental. Cheers.
Take care.